A very good afternoon and welcome to The Ambassador, where we debunk global diplomacy and geopolitics. I am your Ambassador Susan Nganga. Now, scars run deep, nations shattered, economies crippled, generations lost. From Sudan's burning suns to Congo's ravaged heart and Somalia's fractured coast, war leaves a legacy of devastation. Will dissect the economic and education fallout and ask, can these nations rise again? But first, let's look at the top stories making headlines. South Africa's ambassador to the United States, Ibrahim Rasool, has returned home after being expelled by the Trump administration. He was welcomed by cheering supporters at Cape Town International Airport. Rasool was ordered to leave after the United States Secretary of State Marco Rubio accused him of being a race-baiting politician and criticizing Trump's political movement as white supremacist in nature. Here's more on that report. Now, we'll bring that story next. Canada's Prime Minister Mark Carney calls for a snap election for April 28th, citing tensions with the United States President Donald Trump, with trade disputes escalating and nationalism on the rise. Carney faces a tough 5-week campaign.
Prime Minister Mark Carney has called a snap election for April 28, saying he needs a strong mandate to handle tensions with US President Donald Trump. The election was originally set for October, but Carney hopes to take advantage of his party's rising poll numbers since January.
We are facing the most significant crisis of our lifetimes because of President Trump's unjustified trade actions and his threats to our sovereignty.
Relations between Canada and the US have worsened, with Trump imposing tariffs on Canadian goods and even threatening to annex Canada as the 51st state. Earlier this month, Trump delayed a 25% tariff on some Canadian goods for 30 days. However, he has already imposed tariffs on steel and aluminium and is planning new tariffs on dairy and starting April 2.
He wants to break us so America can own us. We will not let that happen. We're over the shock of the betrayal, but we should never forget the lessons.
Canadians have responded with increased nationalism. On Saturday, Toronto residents protested against US tariffs, with polls showing US-Canada relations as a top concern.
And when we are attacked, we stand together.
Carney, a former central banker with no political experience, took office on March 14 after Prime Minister Justin resigned. He secured his party's leadership by convincing members he was the best candidate to take on Trump. On Sunday, he proposed cutting the lowest income tax bracket by 1%. Polls indicate the ruling Liberal Party has gained a slight lead over the opposition Conservatives, who had been ahead earlier in the year. The Conservatives have criticized Carney as an elitist who will continue adjusting high spending policies. With just 5 weeks until the election, Carney faces a tough campaign to win over Canadians. Vivian Scalabo, GBS News.
Pope Francis has been released from the hospital after a 5-week battle with pneumonia. The 88-year-old pontiff was greeted by hundreds of supporters as he left the hospital, marking a significant recovery after a life-threatening illness. While doctors recommend 2 months of rest, they are optimistic that he will eventually resume his normal activities. Here's more on that report.
Pope Francis has been released from the hospital after spending 5 weeks being treated for a life-threatening case of pneumonia. The 88-year-old pontiff was hospitalized in late February, and during his stay, despite the severity of his condition, by the 4th week, the doctors reported that he was no longer in critical condition, marking a turning point in his recovery. As he left the hospital, hundreds of people gathered outside to greet the Pope, expressing their joy and support. Doctors advised that Pope Francis should take at least 2 months of rest to fully recover. During this time, he is to avoid large crowds and strenuous activities to ensure that his health continues to improve. While his recovery period is expected to be gradual, medical professionals are optimistic that he will be able to resume his regular duties once fully recovered. The Pope's hospitalization and subsequent recovery have drawn significant attention globally, as many feared the worst due to his age and the severity of his illness. Throughout the 38 days of medical uncertainty, Pope Francis remained a central figure in the hearts and prayers of millions of Catholics. His release from the hospital signals a positive turn, offering hope to believers who had been closely following his recovery. Elvin Muyodi, GBS News.
Trump administration moves to revoke temporary legal status for 530 immigrants from Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, and Venezuela, cutting short a 2-year parole program introduced under President Biden. The controversial decision, set to take effect on April 24th, intensifies the former president's crackdown on immigration, leaving many families facing an uncertain future.
Starting April 24th, the Trump administration will revoke the temporary legal status of over 500,000 immigrants who have been living in the United States under a special parole program. The individuals, primarily from Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, and Venezuela, had been granted a 2-year window under President Joe Biden, which allowed them to enter the United States with the support of a sponsor and stay in the country temporarily. This move is seen as part of an ongoing effort to tighten immigration policies, furthering the former president's controversial crackdown on foreign nationals seeking refuge in the U.S. The individuals affected by this decision were allowed to enter the country legally by air, but now, with the revocation of their temporary status, their future in the United States is in jeopardy. Critics argue that this action will push many families into the shadows and increase the uncertainty of thousands of immigrants who are hoping to eventually achieve permanent status. The revocation of this temporary legal status is a significant blow to many, particularly those feeling violence and instability in their home countries as they now face the potential for deportation. Reporting for GBS News, Irene Juguna.
Thank you, Irene, for that detailed report. Now, a court ruling has intensified protests in Turkey as a judicial court has ordered that Istanbul Mayor Ekrem İmamoğlu be placed in custody for corruption and terrorism charges. The decision comes just days after he was detained, igniting the largest wave of protest in the country. Here's more on that scene. In Gaza, tensions have escalated following a series of Israeli airstrikes that killed 5 people at a hospital. The attack marks a continuation of Israel's military offensive, which has reignited violence in the region. Furthermore, significant casualties have been reported, with the death toll in Gaza surpassing 50,000 Palestinians. Abdi Hamid Ali has more.
An Israeli airstrike hit Nasser Hospital in Khan Yunis, killing at least 5 people, including Hamas political leader Ismail Barhoum, who was receiving treatment for previous injuries. In addition to Barhoum, Israeli officials maintain that their strikes are aimed at Hamas militants, though they have been criticized for the mounting civilian casualties, which have now surpassed 50,000. As Israel continues its air and ground attacks in Gaza, there are growing concerns over the humanitarian crisis. Thousands of residents in the Rafah and Khan Yunis areas have fled their homes, many moving north to escape the ongoing bombardment. Humanitarian conditions are deteriorating, with warnings of starvation and increasing civilian displacement. The latest offensive has revived questions about the prospects for peace, as Palestinians in Gaza continues to suffer heavy losses. The need for a ceasefire remains critical, yet Israel violated the initial ceasefire by not moving forward with the second phase, making it difficult for a ceasefire agreement to be renewed. This is Abdihamid Ali, GBS News.
Now to the Turkey story that had a technical hitch. A court ruling has intensified protests in Turkey as a judicial court has ordered that Istanbul Mayor Ekrem be placed in custody for corruption and terrorism charges. The decision comes just days after he was detained, igniting the largest wave of protest in the country. Here's more on the scene.
A Turkish court ordered the detention of Istanbul Mayor Ekrem İmamoğlu, pending trial on charges of corruption. This decision quickly triggered protests across Turkey, leading to clash between demonstrators and police, especially in Istanbul and Ankara. İmamoğlu, seen as President Erdogan's most significant challenger, has denied the charges, calling them politically motivated. In response, millions of people, including non-party members, cast their votes in solidarity with İmamoğlu, endorsing him as the opposition's presidential candidate for the upcoming elections. İmamoğlu's arrest comes during a broader crackdown on opposition figures, with many accusing the government of undermining potential rivals ahead of the 2028 elections. Despite the government's claim of an independent judiciary, the arrest of İmamoğlu and the continued crackdown on opposition members have raised questions about the fairness of Turkey's political environment. The central bank has stepped in to manage the financial instability triggered by the unrest, with the Turkish lira plummeting in value. As protests continue, the situation reflects a deepening divide within the country, with many viewing İmamoğlu's detention as an attempt by Erdogan's administration to retain its grip on power. In the face of mounting challenges, İmamoğlu remains defiant, vowing to continue his political fight against Erdogan's government, signaling that this struggle may not end with his arrest. This is Abdihamid Ali, GBS News.
That's Abdi's story takes us to a very fast break where when we come back, we'll explore the current impact of conflicts in Africa on our African In-Depth segment. Stay tuned, we'll be back.
There's nothing that can happen to a man, not unless God allows it to happen.
Do according to him, and he shall love him. He shall love them, and he shall take care of them. Because he says, those who love me, I will hold their hands till the end of time.
Invite someone to come to your house. One of the things that they cannot forget is the phone charge.
When it comes to relationships and probably communication, that distance is not a barrier.
Yeah.
But it is in communication, in effective communication.
Oh, have you told your daughter how they acquire HIV and AIDS? When I go to speak in school, they will tell me, ukimwi ni mnyama mbaya. And no, sio mnyama. They have to know how it happens.
A student can transition from other curriculums, such as the Kenyan CBC curriculum, the Pearson Edexcel curriculum, and the IB curriculum, to the Cambridge curriculum.
Welcome to Fun.
Fun,
continue learning about Jingle Bell Rock. Friends, first you cross your arm and put it on top of your head, and as you go in left side, you open it, then you come back to your place.
And then you make your leg 90 degrees, and then as you put your legs until 90 degrees, you need to jump a bit. 1, 2. Then as you jump a bit, you need to stretch your hands downwards.
And the question of the day is, can you survive without internet?
Ngumu. Plus kuachilia hizo story tu zote zikupite ni ngori.
Niwaambie ukweli. Like hii ni kama kuambia mtu mwenye alikuwa amezoea kushindana nguo, mwambie toa nguo ushinde uchi. Hiyo huku atriki kwa sababu sasa like ilikuwa imekuingia kwa kichwa kabisa.
Mimi nimesomea day school na niocha. So kukuwa na simu hadi ni ile katururu, si smartphone, ni ile katururu.
Sasa unaweza kaa holi ya bila simu.
To spend most of the time kwa simu. Also you need to run skills. So nilikutana na later hapa nikapply huko. And then I started learning skills. Digital skills.
Yes, hadi siku mbili haiwezi.
Kwa wiki naachilia hata kama ni siku mbili ama sometimes na extend to wiki nzima. Napata shida simu yangu.
A student can transition from other curriculums such as the Kenyan CBC curriculum, the Pearson Edexcel curriculum, and the IB curriculum to the Cambridge curriculum.
Welcome to
Fun
Dance Class. Today we will continue learning about Jingle Bell Rock. Friends, first you cross your arm and put it on top of your head, and as you go in left side, you open it, then you come back to your place.
And then you make your leg 90 degrees, and then as you put your legs until 90 degrees, you need to jump a bit. 1, 2. Then as you jump a bit, you need to stretch your hands downwards.
And the question of the day is, can you survive without internet?
Ngumu. Plus kuachilia hizo story tu zote zikupite ni ngori.
Niwaambie ukweli. Like hii ni kama kuambia mtu mwenye alikuwa amezoea kushindana nguo, mwambie toa nguo ushinde uchi. Hiyo huku atriki kwa sababu sasa like ilikuwa imekuingia kwa kichwa kabisa.
Mimi nimesomea day school na niocha. So kukuwa na simu hadi ni ile katururu, si smartphone, ni ile katururu.
Sasa unaweza kaa holi ya bila simu.
To spend most of the time kwa simu. Also you need to run skills. So nilikutana na later hapa nikapply huko. And then I started learning skills.
Hadi siku mbili haiwezi.
Kwa wiki naachilia hata kama ni siku mbili ama sometimes na extend tu wiki nzima. Napata shiki simu yangu.
A student can transition from other curriculums such as the Kenyan CBC curriculum, the Pearson Edexcel curriculum, and the IB curriculum to the Cambridge curriculum.
There's nothing that can happen to a man, not unless God allows it to happen.
Do according to him, and he shall love you. He shall love them, and he shall take care of them. Because he says, those who love me, I will hold their hands till the end of time.
Invite someone to come to your house. One of the things that they cannot forget is the phone charge.
When it comes to relationships and probably communication, that distance is not a barrier.
Yeah.
But it is in communication, in effective communication.
So have you told your daughter how they acquire HIV and AIDS? When I go to speak in school, they will tell me, ukimwi ni mnyama mbaya. And no, sio mnyama. They have to know how it happens.
Welcome to
Fun Dance Class.
Today we will continue learning about Jingle Bell Rock. Friends, first you cross your arm and put it on top of your head, and as you go in left side, you open it, then you come back to your place.
And then you make your leg 90 degrees. And then as you put your legs until 90 degrees, you need to jump a bit. 1, 2. Then as you jump a bit, you need to stretch your hands downwards.
And the question of the day is, can you survive without internet?
Ngumu. Plus kuachilia hizo story tu zote zikupite ni ngori.
Niwaambie ukweli. Like hii ni kama kuambia mtu mwenye alikuwa amezoea kushindana nguo, mwambie toa nguo ushinde uchi. Hiyo huku atriki kwa sababu sasa like ilikuwa imekuingia kwa kichwa kabisa.
Mimi nimesomea day school na niocha. So kukuwa na simu hadi ni ile katururu, si smartphone, ni ile katururu.
Sasa unaweza kaa holi ya bila simu.
Kuspend hii most of the time kwa simu. Also you need to run skills. So nilikutana na place hapa nikapo apply huko. And then I started learning skills. Digital skills.
Hadi siku mbili haiwezi.
Kwa wiki naachilia hata kama ni siku mbili ama sometimes na extend tu wiki nzima. Napata shiki simu yangu.
Everywhere, GPS.
Welcome back. Now, on our today's segment of the African In-Depth, we are exploring the impact of war on African continent, which has shattered lives and crippled vital sectors like education and the economy. The scars of the war stretch deep, leaving entire generations without opportunities for growth and development. But before we get into the discussion, our correspondent Peris Kigo explores the profound impacts of war on this nation in this report.
The heart of Africa. 3 countries, Sudan, Somalia, and the Democratic Republic of the Congo, continues to grapple with the devastating consequences of ongoing conflict. These wars not only tear apart families and communities, but also cripple essential sectors like education and the economy. War leaves deep scars of the economy. In Sudan, the ongoing conflict has ravaged agriculture, once the backbone of the country's economy. Crops have been destroyed, farmlands abandoned, and the trade routes disrupted. The country's oil industry, once a major source of revenue, has plummeted as international sanctions and internal instability create barriers to investment and development.
The roads are not good. We have to travel far to get to the shop. Sometimes it comes illegally from Sudan, getting cash to pay for our supplies. It's so difficult.
Somalia too has been severely affected. The conflict has devastated the fishing industry, once vital for the economy. With no secure environment, traders are reluctant to invest into business, leaving most citizens to survive on humanitarian aid. The country's GDP has seen a sharp decline, further exacerbating poverty. In the Democratic Republic of the Congo, natural resources such as minerals once offered a glimmer of hope. Ongoing violence and armed groups fighting for control of these resources have created an unstable environment for economic growth. Education too bears the brunt of war. In Sudan, millions of children are denied access to school. Schools are either destroyed by bombings or repurposed as military bases.
They were staying here, occupying everything, the whole place. There were trenches here, people eating here in the rooms. It took a while to get them to leave.
Whenever a military uses a school or sets up a base nearby a school, it exposes that school to the possibility of an incoming attack.
Teachers too are often caught in the crossfire, and the country's education system remains crippled by underfunding and displacement. Somalia faces a similar plight. Decades of war have left the education system fractured. Many schools are either too dangerous to attend or have been destroyed altogether.
To debunk more on this, we are joined by Dr. Josh Mayo, an expert in international relations. Alongside him, we have our very own correspondent, Peris Kigo. Welcome to the bulletin. Peris, take us through your report.
Thank you so much, Susan, for this opportunity. About the devastating war that is ongoing in Congo, in Somalia, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, in Sudan, it has led to destruction of infrastructure, whereby this destruction, it has disrupted the flow of goods and services, especially in the industry areas like manufacturing and the oil companies. It has actually disrupted the chains of the flow of goods and services because the road are not, the cars cannot pass the roads because the bridges that enable the transportation, quick access of goods from one country to another, especially from Sudan to Somalia or from Sudan to South Sudan, it has destroyed the infrastructure in that place. And also this war, it has destroyed the education system because you can see the displacement of people. You know, when people are, like in the case of Sudan, when people are moving from this country to Chad, they are living together with the students. So there's not going to be education. The education system is not going to continue in that place. Also meaning that if the students are not going to continue with education, these students, they are going to be recruited into the army, which is bad, and also to be forced in labor. And what will happen to these young girls who are not attending to school? They're going to be forced into early marriages. So you can see it is disrupting even the future of our generation. The students who are supposed to be continuing the education, the conflict has disrupted these chains of academic affairs. So you see the students who we are expecting, the children we are expecting to become great in future, actually their career is being cut short by this war.
Daktari, we once said that we can't talk about the present without talking about the past. So we cannot talk about the impact of African conflict without knowing the root causes of it. Take us through that.
So there's a lot that can be said. By the way, thank you very much for having me again. There is a lot that can be said about the historical roots of conflict on the African continent. Some have argued that a number of the conflicts in Africa are primarily the result of the colonial boundaries that were drawn arbitrarily by the colonial administration to put together groups of people that had nothing to do with each other in the first place.
Yes.
Because the colonizers just sat in a Berlin conference in 1844, if I remember correctly, the partition of Africa, looked at the map of Africa and drew straight lines on the map and allocated each other these territories, regardless of the actual realities on the ground of which groups of people actually inhabited these territories, whether these groups of people had anything in common with each other, whether they spoke the same language, whether they had the same culture, and so on and so forth, which is very different from how European countries actually came into being. They came into being as organic, so-called nation states. A nation is a group of people that have a common identity, a common culture, a common history, and a sense of affinity, togetherness, an identity that we are a group of people. That is a nation. And the states emerged as a result of these nations. In Africa, we have states, but they are not nations. They are fragmented. We have many nationalities within these states. The tribes are the nationalities which were put together. And naturally, these tribes or so-called nations are not cohesive. They have been fighting each other for centuries. And that is why it's easy in Africa to mobilize political conflict around ethnicity, because these groups don't understand each other. So this could be argued to be one of there are many roots of conflicts in Africa. This is one of the primary roots of the conflict on the African continent. And unfortunately, when we gained independence after colonialism, the African Union, one of the charters of the African Union is we will respect colonial boundaries, which means that we are stuck with these groups of people in one state that have no common identity, and they will continue struggling for a long time.
So, Doctor, what do you think when you look at the destruction of the infrastructure? Now we see Sudan and Somalia and also the Democratic Republic of Congo. They have destroyed the infrastructure. How is the destruction of this infrastructure affected the key industry like agriculture and manufacturing?
Maybe we should begin by asking whether there was any infrastructure to begin with after colonization. Many of these countries in conflict have actually been in conflict for a long time. The DRC, for instance, has been in conflict since they gained independence, with the killing of the first Prime Minister, Patrice Lumumba, Mobutu Sese Seko coming into power. He never had control over the entire territory of the country. There were always rebels and other groups holding power in different parts. Sudan has been in conflict almost since independence, before the breakaway of South Sudan. The South Sudanese never felt that they were part of the Sudanese state. They had a different identity, religion, culture, race, and so on and so forth. And they were treated badly by the Northerners. And there was a legacy of slavery as well, where the Northerners used to raid the South to capture them as slaves and to sell them to the Middle East and other traders. So to begin with, First of all, many of these countries that were colonized, the colonizing powers did not invest in building infrastructure to grow these economies. They built infrastructure to extract resources to the global north. And they were not interested in developing these countries. And so to begin with, there was very little infrastructure. The little that was there was primarily in the major cities and major economic centers, whether there was mining or some kind of productivity that could be easily tapped into. So that is one thing. So there was no opportunity to actually build strong, sustainable infrastructures in the first place. And so the kind of infrastructure destruction that we are saying is that the little connectivity that existed between major economic centers is being destroyed strategically to prevent movement of the opponents. So obviously it is, you can bomb a bridge or a dam or major infrastructure installations within one day, which may have taken decades to construct and which is very expensive. So of course, we know that it's easy to destroy than to construct, and it always takes so much longer for countries to actually recover economically, partly because of the enormous cost of infrastructure construction after conflict.
And who do you think, because we can see in Sudan, we have seen 12 million people have been displaced. What do you think is the impact the country brings when people are displaced? They flee away from their country, like in Sudan case. They are fleeing from Sudan, going to Chad to seek for refuge. What impact the displacement of people is bringing to the Sudan economy?
That's an important point you mentioned. I think we need to appreciate, first of all, when a conflict erupts, who are the most likely among the population to flee? Those that flee, first of all, fleeing the country, you know, moving requires money, capability. So those that have the ability to move will be the first ones to move. So the wealthy, the educated, those that have resources, those that have connections, they are the first ones to move. So the elites, professional elites, economic elites, they are the first ones to move, right? So those that have the most ability will actually flee outside the country. Right? Those that have the next ability to move will probably move internally to safer areas, mostly to cities, and so on and so forth. The ones that have the least ability to move are the most poor, the uneducated, the disadvantaged, disabled, the old, and so on and so forth. So when you have this massive displacement of the population, as you've rightly said, in the DRC, about 12 million over that period in time. In Somalia, more than 4 to 5 million, with currently the internally displaced persons in Somalia about 3-point-something million. In Sudan, we are talking about 10 million to 11 displaced in Sudan. In South Sudan, we still have significant populations displaced as well. So first we can't even talk about those that have left the country. Now, those that are in the country are the ones who should be growing the economy, because the human capital is a primary resource to growing a country. But when these persons are displaced, it means that they are not engaged in the daily activities that actually grow the economy, right? Whether it is agriculture, whether it is trade, whether it is services, and so on and so forth. People are basically struggling to survive. They are not being productive. They are being provided for by humanitarian agencies. So it is basically a waste of human capital. And there is no country that has developed without developing its human capital to be productivity is what grows economies. When people are displaced, they are not productive. The country is not productive. That is why, if you look at the list of the poorest countries on the African continent, the top 15 countries are countries that are primarily in conflict, either experiencing violent civil war or a lot of instability. And the countries that we have mentioned, Somalia, DRC, South Sudan, Sudan has slipped. It was fairly developed. It's now slipping down the list of developed countries. So we see a direct correlation between poverty, between conflict, displacement, and economic performance.
And do you think these people who have already been displaced, like the people who are in Chad, the Sudan people who are in Chad, they want to come back. Do you think when they come back, the economy of the country is going to go up or is going to improve when they return?
First of all, are they ever going to go back?
Yeah, some they were arguing, like I saw on a video, some they were crying they want to return back to their country, because you know when you're in a foreign country, no matter what is going in your country, when you're in a foreign country, you don't feel satisfied. So we have some Sudanese who are in Chad, they want to go back to their country because they want to invest in business there. So do you think they are, when they return to Sudan, the country, the economy of Sudan is going to boost?
So what are the dynamics that motivate people to go back, right? Of course, there's the emotional attachment to your motherland, right?
Yeah.
Some of them, it's patriotism. But primarily, the people that actually go back to their homeland after displacement are those that have a reasonable belief that when they go back, their circumstances will be better than living in displacement. So these are people, first of all, who have the means to go back. They have the means to reconstruct their lives and make something for themselves. And this is a small minority. History shows that once people have been displaced, it is very difficult for them to go back. A very good example is Zimbabwe. When Zimbabwe fell into civil conflict during the last years of Mugabe, millions of South Africans, of Zimbabweans moved to South Africa and neighboring countries, Mozambique, Angola, Botswana, and many of them never went back. We have Ugandans who moved out of Uganda during Idi Amin's time, who are still in Kenya. Some of them changed their names, they acquired Kenya names. We have now a third to the fourth generation of Ugandans who never went back. And these were doctors, they were professionals. We have doctors, nurses, teachers, engineers. So it is very difficult for the professional class because they have skills. So they are able to integrate and make a life in the second country they have moved into. So it is these highly productive, highly skilled, qualified persons who can contribute the most who are less likely to go back. Those who will go back are those who are languishing in refugee camps, who have no education, they have no money. They will probably go back hoping to resettle to reacquire their land or resettle in their homes and so on and so forth. So the dynamics of return, I was looking at statistics of Somalia, for instance. In the last year, more than 3 million people were displaced and only 900,000, about 90,000 went back. So you can see the fraction of those that go back is very limited. Yes.
So when you look about international trade, the United Nations did economic sanctions on Sudan. So and also they did an international isolation. So how is Sudan going to be affected in the international trade market?
So nowadays, the international community talks about smart sanctions. Very often they don't sanction an entire country, they sanction individuals that are seen to be the perpetrators of the worst atrocities in a conflict. These individuals are usually wealthy, they are rich, they often have economic investments and trade externally in other countries. So they sanction their businesses, their enterprises abroad. I was reading about the latest developments in the DRC, for instance, that the leaders of M23, some of them have businesses in France, in Belgium, because of international connections. Their businesses have been sanctioned. So their money, their bank accounts are frozen, they cannot travel, and so on and so forth. They're usually arms embargo, so they cannot buy arms. But usually there's limited sanction on trade because it is known that these general sanctions affect the poorest people the most. But having said that, sanctions can have mixed results because many countries, if they have the ability, they can evade the sanctions. Because even though we talk about the international community, not all states normally agree with these sanctions. And some of them actually say that we are signing onto these sanctions, but behind the scenes, they allow some trading to go on because they benefit from this. And so the question of sanction has a mixed bag. And nowadays, the international community does not give blanket sanctions to all countries because it does affect the poorest people.
So when you go to education matter, we can see this war has actually affected students, both Democratic Republic of Congo, both Somalia, and both Sudan. So what do you think about this displacement, the war, the armed group that they have been bombing the schools? How has it affected the learning in Sudan and Somalia, and we have the Democratic Republic of Congo?
That's an important aspect to look at, social services, right? When war occurs, the first casualty is the collapse of social services, not even the physical infrastructure, but provision of services, because teachers will not go to school, nurses and doctors will not go to hospital. Usually the first casualty is education. Parents will not send their children to school because they face the risk of becoming collateral damage, unintended targets, and so on and so forth. Teachers will flee the country, usually to neighboring countries to seek employment, because they can carry their qualifications are portable. You can move with your qualifications and teach elsewhere. So usually schools are the first to collapse, followed by hospitals, although because of humanitarian purposes, and the humanitarian community often provides medical care for those that are most affected by conflict. We see medical services, the normal state provision is affected, and then NGOs step in for humanitarian purposes. But even then, this displacement, of course, it means we have a lost generation, because they cannot go to school, they cannot acquire skills, they are often illiterate, and once kids are out of school, it takes a long time for a country to reconstruct, to bring back the teachers, to raise the quality of its education, so that you can produce a manpower that has the skills and the know-how to engage in productive economic activity. And so it takes a long time for a country to recover once they have slipped into conflict, and it exacerbates the cycle of poverty. A famous World Bank economist known as Paul Collier, who is now a professor of development economics, came up with a theory known as the conflict trap. That once countries degenerate into conflict, they get trapped into a cycle of recurring conflict, because their economies are destroyed, their governing systems are destroyed, security is destroyed, you have massive poverty, and these are conditions that lead to cyclical and recurrent poverty. And it is difficult for these countries to exit out of poverty. And education, another theory that he came up with is the population time bomb. When you have too many young people, and these countries have very high birth rates, right? Even though many people are dying because of disease and conflict, they have high birth rates. I guess when you have conflict, you don't have a job, you don't have a profession, you don't have work to do, the best you can do is produce children. I don't know. But they have high birth rates. So these economists say that, and a lot of these countries have one of the youngest populations in the world. So you have a high percentage of a young population that is not educated, and particularly young men who are not educated, they are easily recruited into conflict. So he argues that these high birth rate, this high population of young men will lead to a population time bomb, because there are no economic activities for them. They can easily engage in conflict, and that is why you have these recurring cycles of conflict.
Doctor, we know recruiting young children, especially what we have seen in Sudan, the Rapid Support Forces recruited some small children into gangs, or even the same case even have happened to Haiti, where young boys, young girls, mostly boys, they are recruited into army. What is the initiative? What is government doing of the country of Sudan and Somalia too? What are they doing? What are the initiatives they are doing to make sure that these young children are not recruited in army to be gangs? What is the role of government in that country? Are they doing any initiative?
It's interesting you ask, but I'm sorry to say, but governments themselves also recruit these young people into their
children.
Yes, they do. Yes, even when a country is at war, normal functions cease to operate. Normal rules of the game cease to operate, because you need the manpower to train and to deploy them quickly, right? And you need to increase the size of your fighting force. So they lower the recruitment age to 14, for instance, or even younger than that. And if they cannot directly go into the conflict, these boys become cooks and porters carrying stuff and waiting for them to grow up so that they can be recruited into the conflict. We have seen in Russia where even prisons are being emptied. Prisoners are being given freedom if you can take the gun and go and fight in the front lines. So normal rules of engagement are suspended during conflict, and either side is guilty of these war crimes of recruiting children. And so we can only talk about disarmament of child soldiers, reintegration, putting them back to school, giving them skills for employment after the conflict has ended. But when the conflict is going on, it is difficult to deal with these situations.
What about the international, those people, the international security? Can they intervene for this country if the government can maybe is not able to handle the gangs who are recruiting these children? Yes, for government it's okay because that's an emergency, because they need this, they need to train these children to fight the gangs. But what about these criminals who are training these children how to kill? Yeah.
So the international community cannot intervene when the conflict is going on. One, they are not on the ground.
But we have the United, what is the work of the United Nations?
But they are not on the ground. When the conflict is raging, like right now in Sudan, you have the RSF and the Sudanese forces, the government forces, they are fighting. There is no international presence in Sudan as we speak, right? And so there's very limited intervention that the international community does. Where the international community comes in is that when the conflict is over, the International Criminal Court can investigate war crimes. If there is evidence of forcible recruitment of minors into conflict, it is a war crime. And so these persons can be prosecuted after that. So the international law acts, it's supposed to act as a deterrent, to deter the perpetrators from engaging in activities that are criminal in nature, knowing that they will be held accountable one day. But of course, in the heat of conflict, very few of them are actually thinking of the legal consequences of their actions once the conflict is over. Because usually we have in international law, international war, the law of war, that we have what is known as a victor's justice. A victor's justice is that international justice is often for the losers, but not the victors. When you're victorious, you're in charge of government, the international community cannot touch you. You are in power, right? And the international, because of sovereignty, countries, states are sovereign. No country can force another country to do anything. You cannot intervene. So once you are in office, you are untouchable, right? And we have seen that the international community is often ready to make peace with the victor for the sake of stability, rather than pursuing justice to destabilize the situation. Because once a conflict is over, you would rather work with the victor rather than create problems for the victor, because you will plunge the country into further conflict. So this is just how the rules of the international game function. And in many cases, we see that, of course, it is the vulnerable victims of conflict that suffer. So then what we do is that the international community will pour money into demobilization, retraining of these children, providing psychological support, putting them to school, and hoping to make decent citizens, because sometimes you cannot turn back the clock.
Dr. You talked about sovereignty. But who will hold the leaders accountable?
Yes.
The current leaders accountable. Because many argue that although we blame the colonial era for what's happening currently in Africa, like you have said earlier, but there's something called neocolonialism or coloni mambo leo. So, Dr. who will hold these leaders accountable, and what are they doing to our country?
I will give an example of al-Bashir, the former president of Sudan. He was accused of perpetrating war crimes and crimes against humanity in the Darfur conflict back in the early 2000s. The International Criminal Court actually carried out investigations and released an arrest warrant for al-Bashir. Until today, al-Bashir is a fugitive of international justice. He is wanted by the International Criminal Court. So he was the president. Unfortunately, it is up to countries who are signatories of the law, the international law, to arrest this person and hand him over to the ICC. Because the ICC doesn't have its own police force. It cannot walk into a country, arrest a person that has been indicted and take them to court. It is up to these countries to cooperate and send them there. So this is the problem. The ICC has released arrest warrants against Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, and the commander of the Israeli forces, for war crimes and crimes against humanity. Others claim even genocide. But as long as he's the prime minister and as long as he gets the support of America, he will never be handed over to the International Criminal Court. So there are the international laws exist to prevent these things from happening, but it is up to the goodwill of the international community to cooperate with the International Court in order to make sure that there is no impunity, that people do not perpetrate war crimes and get away with it.
So, Doctor, what do you think is the future of these students who are not attending to school? Because we see 10.5 million people, students, are not attending to school. What is the future of these students, of these children?
Well, yeah, we can't call them students because they are not in school.
Okay,
but they are children,
children,
yes.
children.
They are children. They are still minors. They are school-going age, we can say that. So they should be in school, but they are not. The only hope for them is cessation of the conflict. Until and unless the conflict actually stops, so that there is a process of what we call transition, okay, post-conflict development, and a transition to a peaceful, stable society so that these children can go to school. And for many of them, it will be too late. They will be young adults, right, in their 20s, some of them in their 30s. If a war rages for even 10 years, or sometimes even 5 years, a child who is 14, when a war breaks out, within 5 years, they will be 19, 20, and it will be too late for them to go back to school. And in countries such as South Sudan, where conflict lasted for a very long time, the DRC right now, the Sudan conflict, unless they are in a refugee camp, where humanitarian agencies provide education for them, or in an internally displaced camp where there is humanitarian services for education, even then they get stuck after primary school, because usually refugee camps provide basic education, that you're able to read and write, basic literacy, and maybe up to high school. But this is not sufficient to give you any skill that you can actually use to get employment. It's just basic literacy. So for them, it will be too late. And that is why it is difficult for countries that have been in conflict to rise up economically, because as we said, you have this lost generation of the productive workforce that simply never got the chance to an education and skills and the opportunity to work. So then the hope is for the younger generation that once this country stabilizes, the younger children will then go to school and then go through the ranks. So we are talking about 15 to 20 years for this country to have actually a qualified workforce that can lead to economic growth.
Dr. as we conclude, 16 countries now in Africa are currently in war, right? So what next for Africa if we continue fighting? Are we seeing a place where Africa will stop the fight? Are we seeing a place where African states will come together and say, you know what, let's stop this fighting?
I was following the developments in the DRC conflict because Kagame and Tshisekedi were hosted in Doha in Qatar by the Qatari government for peace talks. But at the same time, there was a parallel process going on in Luanda in Angola under the auspices of the South African Development Community, SADC. And the president of Angola was saying, look, we were not even told about this meeting that was happening in Doha. We were not involved. We cannot have parallel processes. The African Union has now this slogan that of African solutions to African problems. But as long as we have international actors meddling in the African conflicts to bolster their diplomatic credentials. Qatar is not a very powerful country globally. It seeks to bolster its global image by playing mediator in the conflict, right? And by so doing, actually undermining peace process that was taking place in Africa. Why? Because Qatar is a major donor to Rwanda. It's a major donor to DRC. They buy some of their minerals. So it has some kind of leverage. So what I would say is that the international community should stop meddling in African conflicts, both financing and then pretending that they want to host peace talks, and let Africans find ways to solve their own problems. because the M23 said, we don't know what's going on in Qatar. We were not involved. We were not called. We were not part of those talks. So those talks are useless as far as we are concerned.
Yes.
And so basically, when you are not involving the actors in the conflict, those efforts simply go nowhere. So the future of Africa is to find their own solutions, strengthen African institutions for peace building, peace enforcement, peacekeeping, and hopefully one day we will get there.
One day, Dr. Iris. Okay, and that's all for today in this discussion in the African segment. Thank you for joining us as we uncover the latest development. We'll continue to bring you updates on these stories and more as they unfold. Remember, this is The Ambassador, where we debunk global diplomacy and geopolitics. I have been your Ambassador Susan Nganga. Good afternoon.